Welcome back to Scripted Fear. Tonight, we begin a story that still lingers in my memory like a shadow I can't shake. This is The Watcher in the Woods. It started like any other school trip. I was a sophomore in 2012, and our high school had arranged a day-long excursion to a historic battlefield out of town. When the announcement was made in class, everyone cheered, not because we cared about history, but because it meant no lessons, no assignments, and a full day out of the building. We were just excited to escape. That morning, the bus was alive with noise. Kids shouted across aisles. Music leaked from cheap earbuds. Chip bags rattled. Soda cans hissed open. Teachers sat at the front pretending they had things under control, though everyone knew they didn't. I sat a few rows back, headphones in, forehead against the glass, watching the familiar streets fade into stretches of farmland. At first, the ride felt ordinary, but as the city disappeared, so did the noise outside. Houses became barns. Then barns gave way to endless lines of trees. Dark, dense forest pressed close to the road on either side. And the deeper we went, the quieter the bus seemed to get. The laughter softened. Even the rowdy kids ran out of energy, their voices dying down to murmurs. It wasn't just us. Outside, the world itself seemed muted. No cars passed us. No birds flew overhead. It was like we'd left something behind, some invisible line we weren't supposed to cross. After 2 hours, the bus slowed and pulled into a gravel lot at the edge of the reserve. Everyone piled out, still buzzing with leftover energy. But the excitement didn't sound the same anymore. Kids laughed, but it was forced, too sharp, the kind of laughter you use to cover nerves. The lot was nearly empty, just a few other school buses and a sagging visitors center with peeling white paint and a broken sign swaying in the breeze. The air was cold for spring, damp enough to cling to your skin. Even when sunlight broke through, the light looked weak, filtered through layers of branches that never let it fully reach the ground. A guide was waiting for us. Middle-aged, beard flecked with gray, ball cap pulled low. He spoke in that practiced monotone you hear from people who've told the same story 1,000 times. He explained how this reserve wasn't just any forest. It had been a war camp decades earlier. Soldiers had marched through here, fought here, and many of them had died here. Their graves, he said, were still in the soil beneath our feet. Dozens of them. He spoke about shallow burials, about the way heavy rains sometimes exposed bones when the earth shifted. A few kids laughed nervously, but no one laughed for long. There was something about his words, the flat way he said them, that made it feel less like a history lesson and more like a warning. We followed him down the trail, teachers at the back trying to keep order as we spread into small groups. The path was narrow, roots breaking through the soil in places, moss climbing over fallen logs. The deeper we went, the darker it became. The trees closed in, tall and suffocating, their branches tangled overhead like a ceiling that blotted out the sky. It felt like we were being swallowed whole. The guide stopped in a clearing to talk about an old skirmish that had supposedly happened there. While he spoke, I let my eyes wander to the edge of the tree line. That's when I saw it. A shape, thin, too still, standing between the trees. At first I thought it was another teacher, someone keeping an eye on the group. But when I tried to focus, I realized I couldn't make out a face. Its skin looked too pale, too smooth. My chest tightened. I blinked, and the figure was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the light. Shadows, nothing more. But the feeling didn't leave. From that moment on, I couldn't shake the sense that we weren't alone in those woods, that something had followed us in, that something was watching. When Allison's absence finally sank in, the air around us seemed to thicken. At first, nobody wanted to say it out loud, like if we stayed quiet, she'd just reappear on the trail behind us. The teacher started counting again, moving lips silently, hoping the numbers would change. But they didn't. Allison was gone. I remember how the laughter that had filled our group earlier just drained away. Even the birds stopped. All I could hear was the crunch of our shoes shifting in the dirt as we stood there, waiting. The guide told us not to panic. His voice was calm, but there was a crack in it, like he'd been through this before. He said he'd walk back down the trail and find her. He told us to stay exactly where we were. Then he disappeared into the trees, the sound of his boots fading until there was nothing but silence. Minutes passed. 10, 15. The group was restless now, whispers darting back and forth. Someone muttered that Allison was probably just hiding, trying to scare us, but no one really believed it. I remember turning to my friend Daniel. He was pale, chewing the inside of his cheek, staring into the trees like he expected something to step out. I whispered to him, "Did you see anyone else out here?" "Another group." He shook his head quickly. That's when I told him about the figure I'd seen earlier, the pale shape, watching us from the tree line. His face tightened like he wanted to call me crazy but couldn't. He just said, "Don't say that right now." The guide finally returned, but his expression told the story before he opened his mouth. He was breathing hard, sweat dripping down his forehead, and his hands wouldn't stay still. He told us Allison must have taken a wrong turn, that we'd catch up with her later at the bus, but he couldn't look anyone in the eye when he said it. His voice was too fast, too eager to move on. Something about the way he glanced over his shoulder every few seconds made my stomach knot. We kept walking, the path narrowing, the trees pressing closer. The air was damp and cold, heavier than before. My hoodie clung to my skin, and every sound seemed sharper: the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves high above, even our own breathing. Nobody spoke above a whisper anymore. It felt like the forest was listening. At one point, we passed a tree with bark stripped clean in long, jagged lines. Someone joked that it looked like claw marks, but no one laughed. Then I felt it again, that pressure, that strange pull from the tree line. I looked left, and there it was, a figure just like before, standing perfectly still among the trees. Thin, too thin. Its skin was pale, almost gray, like candle wax. And where its face should have been, there was just nothing. No eyes, no mouth, just a smooth, blank surface that caught the faint sunlight in a way that made me feel sick. I blinked hard and grabbed Daniel's arm, but when I looked again, it was gone. I didn't tell anyone this time. I just kept walking, heart racing, sweat running cold down my back. Because deep down I knew it wasn't my imagination. It was real, and it was following us. When we finally reached the clearing near the end of the trail, the guide rushed us through his last bit of history about the soldiers and their graves, his words tumbling over each other. He didn't even stop long enough for questions. The teachers looked uneasy, checking the group over and over, like they were expecting another kid to vanish. But Allison's name was still missing from the count. Her absence clung to us like a shadow. Back at the bus, panic spread fast. Allison wasn't there. Her backpack was gone. The teachers tried to keep calm, making phone calls, talking in hushed voices near the driver. But we could see it in their faces. They were scared. The guide slipped away without anyone noticing. One second, he was standing near the trees. The next, he was just gone. None of us saw him leave. That made my skin crawl more than anything else. We sat on the bus for what felt like hours. No one laughed. No one even whispered. We just sat there, the weight of what had happened pressing down on us. The teachers eventually told us we had to head back, that the police would take over the search. I stared out the window the whole ride home, but I couldn't focus on the fields rushing by. All I could see was that faceless figure waiting between the trees. That night, when I finally lay in my bed, I thought about Allison out there in the dark, lost, cold, maybe still alive, maybe not. My mind kept circling back to that pale thing. Was it watching her the way it had been watching us? Was it standing just out of sight every time she turned her head? I didn't sleep at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. Tall, thin, skin stretched too tight, face smooth and blank, standing at the edge of the woods, waiting. That bus ride home was the longest of my life. Nobody said a word. Even the usual troublemakers sat frozen, staring at the floor or pressing their heads against the windows like they couldn't stand to meet anyone's eyes. The teachers whispered to each other, their voices low but sharp, their hands shaking every time they pulled out their phones. It was obvious they were trying to keep us calm, but it was already too late. Something had happened in those woods, something we couldn't explain, and we all knew Allison wasn't just lost. When we got back to the school, our parents were waiting. Teachers forced smiles, fed us the same lines. She must have gotten turned around. The police are already searching. She'll be fine. But no one really believed it. Parents hugged their kids tighter that day. I remember my mom gripping my shoulders, her eyes wide, asking me over and over if I was okay, if I saw what happened. I told her no, but inside, the truth was clawing at me. I had seen something. Not what happened to Allison exactly, but what had been waiting for her. What had been waiting for all of us. The next morning, her disappearance was all over the news. Local reporters crowded the school entrance, their microphones shoved in kids' faces as we walked past. Missing girl, last seen on a school trip. Search party deployed. Authorities remain hopeful. I watched it unfold from the cafeteria. TV screens showing images of the forest. Officers combing through undergrowth. Volunteers with flashlights and dogs. They never said anything about the guide. It was like he didn't exist. No interviews, no statements, nothing. Days passed. Rumors started spreading, as they always do. Someone swore they saw Allison's shoe near the creek bed. Someone else claimed a search dog refused to go any deeper into the woods, barking and whining until the handler dragged it back. At night, kids whispered about the faceless figure. I never told anyone I had seen it, but somehow, others described it the same way. Thin, pale, watching from the tree line. We didn't compare notes, didn't share details, but the stories all matched. That scared me more than anything. After a week, the announcement came. They found her, or what was left of her. Officially, they said she must have gotten lost, dehydrated, and succumbed to the elements. But that's not what spread through the halls. The kids who claimed to know someone on the search team painted a different picture. They said her body was found far from any trail, deep in the forest where no one should have been able to reach. They said her face looked wrong, stretched, torn in places, like the skin had been pulled too tight over her skull. They said her eyes were missing. The teachers warned us not to spread lies, not to sensationalize a tragedy. But their voices trembled, and that told me enough. They had heard the same stories, maybe even seen the photos. They knew something wasn't right. I didn't sleep much after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined Allison's last moments. Did she wander off because she thought she saw something familiar? Did she hear a voice calling her name? Did she turn and see that faceless figure standing in the shadows, closer and closer each time she blinked? The more I thought about it, the more certain I became. Whatever took Allison had been following us all along, watching, waiting, choosing. Weeks later, I couldn't shake it. I started digging online, searching for the history of the nature reserve. Buried in old newspapers and forgotten forums, I found more. Hikers gone missing, campers who vanished overnight, search parties that turned up nothing but shredded tents and scattered belongings. Locals had a name for it: the Watcher, a pale figure said to haunt the forest, faceless and silent, stalking those who wandered too deep. Some claimed it was the spirit of a soldier left in an unmarked grave. Others swore it was older, something tied to the land itself, feeding on anyone unlucky enough to cross its path. The more I read, the more my stomach sank, because the stories matched exactly what I saw, and they stretched back decades. Allison wasn't the first. She won't be the last. It's been years since that trip, but the memory hasn't faded. If anything, it's sharper now. I can still see the bus windows fogged with our breath, the teachers' pale faces, Daniel's trembling hand gripping the seat in front of him. And behind it all, in the corner of my mind, that figure, tall, thin, faceless, watching from the trees. I don't go near forests anymore. I don't camp, I don't hike. I don't even drive on back roads if I can avoid it. But sometimes, when I'm walking home at night, I catch myself glancing toward the darker parts of the street, the shadows between houses, the edges of tree lines. Because deep down, I know it's still out there. The Watcher doesn't stay in one place. It follows, patient, silent. And if you ever find yourself in the woods, and you feel the weight of unseen eyes pressing on your back, don't turn around. Don't look for it, because the moment you see it, the moment you recognize it for what it is, that's when it chooses you. That's when it never lets you go. We were broke college kids, and that was reason enough to say yes when Kyle found a getaway spot listed online for cheap, a cabin deep in the woods, 3 nights for less than what we'd spend on gas and food during spring break. He showed us the listing on his phone during lunch. Grainy pictures of a wooden shack with a stone chimney, a porch sagging under its own weight, and a vague caption about unplugging from the chaos of modern life. It should have been a red flag, but we were 20. A roof over our heads and no RA breathing down our necks sounded perfect. The drive out there felt endless. City lights gave way to dark roads lined with pine trees, their needles shivering in the wind like whispers. The farther we went, the worse the cell service got, until our screens showed nothing but no signal. None of us cared at first. We were laughing, singing along to songs, tossing snacks at each other. But after hours of winding roads and nothing but trees, the energy shifted. The windows were black mirrors. Every bend looked the same. No houses, no cars, no signs of life. When we finally found the dirt road that led to the cabin, the car jolted and bounced like it was being punished for every decision that brought us there. Branches scraped against the roof and doors as if the forest itself didn't want us inside. Then there it was, the cabin. Small, hunched, swallowed by shadows. The porch sagged worse than the pictures showed, and the windows looked darker than they should have, like the glass itself didn't want to reflect the headlights. Kyle killed the engine, and for the first time all day, silence filled the car. No radio, no laughter, no sound but the tick of the cooling engine. We just sat there, staring at the place we were supposed to spend the weekend. "Looks cozy," Daniel finally said. Nobody laughed. Inside, the cabin smelled of rot and damp wood. The air was heavy, wet, like stepping into a basement that hadn't been opened in years. Our footsteps echoed too loud against the wooden floor. Even though the cabin was barely 2 rooms, there was furniture, but it all felt wrong, like it had been left there for people who would never stay long. A table with uneven legs. For chairs, one missing a spindle. A couch with stuffing bulging through the seams. The fireplace was choked with ash. We unpacked, trying to convince ourselves it was fine. Just old, just worn down. But as night fell, the shadows inside stretched and thickened until the cabin looked smaller, like the walls were inching closer with every hour. We tried to distract ourselves with board games and cheap beer, but by midnight, everyone was restless. The silence outside was suffocating. No crickets, no owls, no wind through the trees. Just nothing. Every sound we made felt amplified, bouncing back at us from the dark. That's when the scratching started. At first, it was faint, a soft scrape against the wood siding. We froze, glanced at each other, waited. Then it came again, longer, higher, like claws dragging across the outside wall. Daniel muttered that it was probably a raccoon, but his voice cracked. Kyle grabbed a flashlight and yanked the front door open, shining the beam into the trees. Nothing, just black trunks and tangled branches. The light didn't reach far before the dark swallowed it. We shut the door and locked it, tried to laugh it off, but the scratching didn't stop. It circled the cabin, slow, careful, moving from one wall to the next. Sometimes low, near the floor, sometimes high, near the windows, always just out of sight. And then, around 2 in the morning, came the knock. 3 heavy, deliberate bangs against the front door. We didn't move, didn't breathe. We just stared at the door, waiting for it to happen again. But it didn't. The silence stretched on, longer and longer, until I wished the sound would come back just to break it. That was our first night in the cabin. The night we realized we weren't alone. The second night should have been easier. That's what we told ourselves when the sun came up and the trees outside looked less like walls and more like, well, trees. In daylight, the cabin felt less like a trap and more like just another bad rental. We made coffee on a rusted stovetop, opened a few beers before noon, and tried to laugh about how scared we'd been. Scratching raccoons, mystery knockers. We're just city kids spooked by the woods, Kyle said. It almost worked. Almost. But as the day went on, something started to gnaw at us. We realized we hadn't seen a single car on the dirt road. No hikers, no hunters, no signs that anyone else had been near the cabin for months, maybe longer. The forest was too still, too clean. It felt less like wilderness and more like a set, something staged around us. Daniel suggested exploring, but the second we stepped off the porch, it felt wrong. The forest pressed close, branches tangling overhead like they wanted to block the sky. After 20 minutes of walking, we should have been able to hear the cabin again, if not see it. But when we turned back, all we saw were trees. No path, no porch, no sign of where we'd come from. My chest tightened with panic. But Kyle forced us forward until the roof finally broke through the trees again. Relief hit so hard it made my knees weak. We didn't try leaving again after that. By the time the sun set, the air in the cabin felt heavier, almost humid, like the walls were sweating. We tried to distract ourselves with food, games, anything, but every creak of the wood made us jolt. And when night finally swallowed the cabin, it all started again. The scratching returned first, louder this time, aggressive. It didn't circle lazily like before. It darted, scuttled, stopped sharp. then started again on the opposite wall as if something was sprinting around us. Daniel cursed under his breath, fists clenched, but none of us moved to the window. We didn't want to see what was out there. Then came the tapping. Not claws this time. Knuckles. Soft, deliberate taps against the glass of the back window. Tap, tap, tap. Each one spaced out, patient. Kyle shone the flashlight, but the glare on the glass reflected only us, for pale faces pressed together, eyes wide, holding our breath. Nothing outside, nothing we could see. At one point, the tapping shifted to the kitchen window, then the bedroom, then the front door. Each time, we froze, the sound following us as if something knew where we were standing. By midnight, none of us were speaking. We just sat there, listening. The scratching and tapping slowed, then stopped completely. For a moment, I thought maybe it was over, that maybe whatever was out there had lost interest. But then, footsteps. Heavy, slow, crunching through the dirt and gravel around the cabin. Not an animal, not claws, boots. Someone walking in deliberate circles. We could track the sound as it moved from the porch, around the walls, past the bedroom window, then back again. Every few minutes, the steps would stop, leaving a silence so complete I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, after what felt like forever, they'd start again. Always circling, always just outside. Around 2 in the morning, Kyle finally snapped. He grabbed the flashlight and a kitchen knife and swore he was going to scare off whoever was messing with us. Before we could stop him, he yanked the door open and stormed out onto the porch, the beam cutting through the dark. "Hey," he shouted, his voice shaking more than he wanted. "Who's out there?" Silence. We leaned out the door behind him, straining our eyes. Nothing. No footsteps. No movement. Just trees standing too still, too close. Then, faintly, behind us, 3 knocks against the inside wall of the cabin. We spun around. The sound had come from the opposite side of where we were standing. Inside the cabin, as if something had been waiting for us to leave. Kyle dropped the knife. We slammed the door shut and locked it, even though the lock felt useless now. Whatever was happening wasn't outside anymore. That was the moment the cabin stopped being shelter. It wasn't just a place in the woods. It was something else. Something alive. Something that wanted us there. And for the rest of that night, none of us slept. We just sat there in the choking dark, listening as the walls seemed to breathe. The third night should have been our last. We had already decided that no matter what, we'd pack up and leave at first light. But when morning came, the dirt road was gone. I don't mean covered or blocked, I mean gone. We followed it for half a mile in both directions, and it just ended, like the forest had erased it overnight. We argued about it for hours. Daniel swore we'd just taken the wrong path, that we were too panicked to notice the right turn. But deep down, all of us knew the truth. The road hadn't disappeared. We had. By the time the sun set, the cabin felt like a cage. The windows seemed darker, like the glass itself was coated in something that absorbed the light. The air inside was thicker, harder to breathe. Even our voices sounded smaller, like the wood was swallowing our words before they could echo. We tried to make a plan, but none of us could think straight. It was as if the cabin didn't want us to leave. That night, the sounds began earlier. Not scratching, not tapping. Voices, low, muffled, like someone whispering just beneath the floorboards. At first I thought it was Daniel, muttering in his sleep, but when I shook him awake, the voices didn't stop. They grew louder, more layered. Dozens of voices, speaking in tones we couldn't understand. The words weren't English. They weren't any language I'd ever heard. It was chanting, almost like a prayer. Kyle lost it. He started screaming back at the floor, stomping his boots against the wood, shouting for whoever it was to shut up. The voices stopped immediately. For a second, I thought maybe it had worked. But then, 3 hard knocks from beneath the floor, directly under Kyle's feet. He froze. We all did. The knocks came again, louder. The boards shook. Then the entire cabin groaned, like the foundation itself was shifting. The voices returned, this time all around us, beneath the floor, behind the walls, above the ceiling. It was like being inside a throat, every plank vibrating with sound. Daniel covered his ears, rocking back and forth, whispering that he wanted to go home. Sarah was crying. Kyle just stared at the fireplace, wide-eyed, whispering that he saw someone standing in the flames. The lights flickered, then died. The only glow came from the cracks in the wood, faint and red, as if something was burning just beyond the walls. And that's when we saw the shapes. At first, they were shadows, tall and thin, sliding across the windows even though nothing should have been outside. But then they pressed closer, paler, sharper, faces without features, just smooth skin where eyes and mouths should be. They leaned against the glass, not breaking it, just pressing, as if they were testing the barrier. Sarah screamed, and the glass behind her cracked. A thin line spread across the pane, branching like veins. The shadows leaned harder, the wood groaning as if the entire cabin was about to split open. We grabbed our things and ran for the door, but the knob wouldn't turn. It wasn't locked. It just wouldn't move, like the door wasn't a door anymore. Kyle rammed his shoulder into it until the frame shook, but the wood only bent inward, like it was breathing, swallowing the force. The chanting rose higher, louder, until it was all I could hear, rattling in my skull. Sarah collapsed, clutching her ears. Daniel started screaming, but his voice was swallowed by the sound, muted, like he wasn't even there. I grabbed the knife from the floor where Kyle had dropped it the night before and swung it at the wall. The blade cut through the wood, but no light came through. Just more darkness, blacker than night. And the wood healed itself, sealing the cut like flesh. The shadows pressed closer. One of them leaned its face against the cracked window, skin stretching across the glass until it split. The sound of breaking made my stomach drop. Shards hit the floor, and a freezing wind poured inside. The shape began to crawl through, stretching, pulling itself into the room. That's when the fire in the fireplace roared to life. Not orange, not yellow, but deep red, like molten stone. Shapes flickered in the flames, more of them, dozens, maybe hundreds, writhing and clawing, all pressing against something unseen. The cabin shook violently, beams cracking, boards splitting. I thought it was going to collapse on top of us. And then, silence. I opened my eyes. I don't even remember closing them. And it was morning. The fire was out. The cabin stood whole, untouched. The windows were intact. The air was still. For a second, I thought I had dreamed it all. But Sarah was gone. So was Daniel. Only Kyle and I remained, sitting in the middle of the cabin floor, staring at each other in silence. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, his lips trembling, like he was still hearing something I couldn't. We didn't say a word. We just grabbed our bags and walked outside. The dirt road was back. We left without looking back. Not once. I never spoke to Kyle again. Not because we didn't want to, but because he never came back to school. They said he dropped out. No one knew where he went. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. Sometimes, late at night, I'll hear knocking in my apartment walls. 3 hard knocks. Slow. Deliberate. Like the cabin found me again. Like it's reminding me I was never supposed to leave.